right? And then you could say another example, a negative global emotion would be fear or terror. You can see that if I'm just basically terrified and every time anything upsets me, of any time I'm basically hitting this global terror that I have, then you can see that this terror is going to govern, control what I then do. And for most of us, the terror controls the entire creation of the facade as well. For all of us, that's the case. So the entire facade is all driven by this terror as well. So we even create whole constructions of our entire life on the top of one single global emotion. One single emotion within us that we refuse to feel. Right? Now, can you see that it makes sense then that if we have a construction on top of one emotion, so if you imagine the emotion of terror is here, so that's terror, and on top of terror, we have built a whole series of things, let's call it our facade. You can see that if this terror disappears, then it's highly likely the foundation for the facade will also... You're basically removing its foundation, so what's going to happen to the building? It's just going to collapse naturally, isn't it? So you can see straight away that you've got two potential ways of addressing your facade. One way is to pick away at the facade, room by room, situation by situation. But if you don't address this, you're not addressing its foundation. The foundation remains. And so this is the thing with global emotions. They are the foundations of buildings. Now, any unloving building you've created inside of yourself emotionally is going to be driven by an unloving global emotion, a negative global emotion. Any foundation that's positive, like faith, is going to build a different kind of building, a positive, a loving building. You can see straight away that how do I become my loving self? I build with my tools that are loving. How did I become my unloving self? I built with the tools that were unloving. In the first century, I called this foundation built on sand and a foundation built on rock. And many of you may have heard of that illustration from the Bible. Foundations built on sand are foundations that God's laws are trying to are buildings that God's laws are trying to deconstruct. So a building built on a foundation of sand is a building that God's laws are attempting to deconstruct. And all of God's laws are focused on the deconstruction of that particular building. So some of your lives you're going to find God wants to deconstruct the whole lot of your life, because that's all you've ever built. And so when you go through the process, you might even get to the point where almost everything in your life is completely different than what you began with. Because most of the things we've constructed using this foundation of terror have been false and things that God wants to deconstruct. And God's laws are going to deconstruct it sooner or later. All right? And many of us have to be prepared for that, and we're not. We're not prepared for that. We want to selectively go, hang on a sec, you're talking to me about deconstructing my entire building? No way, man. I have nowhere to live then. And that's the way we feel, isn't it? Once you get rid of my whole facade, where am I going to be? Nowhere. Like, I've got to keep a bit of it, just safe, keep bit of it, just so I can feel like I belong somewhere, even. You'll find, in fact, when God deconstructs some of these buildings, that you'll be left in a very psychologically vulnerable place. And it's only the tools, including God's love, that are going to help you build a more solid building, one that will last forever, in fact. Does that make sense? Yeah. Is there any questions about that? So if we have Mary up the back, thanks. Okay.
Yep. So when you talk about terror, it feels to me that there's a terror of experiencing terror itself, of the bodily experience of terror. But are you also talking about terror of specific things? So a terror of my pain or a terror of just being myself?
Yes, of course. You've got firstly the global terror, which is all about the emotion of terror itself.
So it's
Not
the
wishing
fear of feeling terror, bodily, emotionally, of anything.
You're not letting me finish.
I'm breaking my own rules.
So the emotion of terror is this a global emotion that we have that governs everything. And it's a refusal to feel the terror itself, the actual refusal. And usually in this place, we've never felt terror for the majority of our lives. In other words, every time terror has come up, we've always jumped to prevent the feeling of it. Right? So that's that one feeling. But there are individual fears associated with our pain, some of which are quite terrifying, but they are individual fears relating to the individual pains that were created, which you'll discover underneath. So you could say underneath the terror, this global emotion of terror, becomes individual false beliefs, fears, that cover over individual amounts of pain. But that's all covered by the terror. The terror is like blanket over that.
So it's terror of terror, really. It's a refusal to experience terror.
Yeah, see, I don't call it terror of terror. I don't really feel there's any such thing.
No.
It's just the refusal to experience an emotion that we call terror, right? It's a refusal to experience it. Now, for many of you, yes, you think you're terrified of it, but the reality is, like, you haven't even touched it to know what you're terrified of. So, you don't know what you really feel about it. You just automatically detuning from it. You automatically run away from it. So, and this is where I feel a lot of people are, is that this emotion, they don't understand why it's there, right? But I don't feel you can have a fear of feeling terror. All you need to do is choose to feel the emotion of terror itself, and anything that is constructed by it will automatically start falling down and disappearing. And it's the unwillingness to experience that global emotion of terror. It's not having a terror of the terror, I feel. Does that make sense? Like I know, I know that's how people think of it, but to me, it's all just a refusal to use the tools of faith, the positive global emotion of faith, to feel an emotion that is the global emotion in the negative direction. If I have enough faith, I will feel this emotion of terror.
And is it the case that when I surrender to that terror, I might find it's attached to something, some particular thing, or it's just really about the experience of an emotion that I've previously refused?
You don't care what it's attached to.
Yeah. Okay,
in the end.
thank you.
Like, you really don't. It's like you will know what it might be attached to, and as I've pointed out already in previous sessions, the majority of time it's attached to being your real self, right? Your terror of being your real self in any circumstance. But the reality is that you go through the terror and then you know what it was about. And it's the same with every emotion. You have to go through the emotion before you know what it's about. Most of you with terror and other negative emotions want to know what it's about before you experience it, and that's your problem. That is a big problem, wanting to know in advance what an emotion is and why it's there. The emotion covers over why it's there. So the only way you are going to actually know why it was there was by feeling the emotion, and then you will know why it was there. So many of you are trying to put that back to front. You see, this is the development of our intellect, and we've talked about the intellectual side of things here before. The development of our intellect basically says, I want to know everything before I feel anything. And what I'm saying to you is you've got to get used to knowing nothing before you feel anything. Knowing nothing. But most of you don't feel comfortable with that. because it feels to you like I've got to surrender to what? I don't know, right? Tell me what it is first, and then I can feel comfortable with surrendering. And I'm saying, no, you're going to have to surrender, and then you'll know what it is that you're surrendering to. Right? But let's move forward because we need to discuss some more things in this section, and I'm already a bit behind. So, okay, who's next? Kate, thanks.
Thank you. So, is it possible, since the terror is global, is it possible that if we just deconstruct the facade around even just one issue, then we can access the global terror, and then if we just then, once we access it, like try to focus on that could sort of be like a quicker way?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Kate, because what's probably going to happen in practice for the majority of you is you're going to have to substantially deconstruct your addictions before you're going to be able to access your global terror, because your addictions are your primary method of avoiding your global terror. So while you continue to engage your addictions, it's very hard to access global terror. You have to actually go through a process of deconstructing your addictions quite strongly first before you'll access the global terror, the governing emotion of terror. So for the majority of you, while in theory you could just deal with this and everything would be gone, in practice you've got a whole heap of addictions in play which are automatic. And these automatic addictions which help prevent your global experience of this global terror, the emotion of terror, those addictions are the addictions you need to focus your attention on. Now, many of you have quite a large number of addictions associated with that terror. Does that make sense? So, for example, the addiction to food is actually an addiction associated with the terror. The addiction to sweets, the addictions to, and when I say addiction to alcohol, I'm not talking about where you get drunk, I'm just talking about needing a drink. The feeling of needing a drink to calm down is an addiction that covers over that particular feeling from physical addictions. Then for some of you it's sex, for some of you drugs, for some of you medically prescribed drugs help avoid this terror. For others, it's being busy, doing things. Many of you are addicted to noise. You're addicted to noise as a way of not feeling terror. So when you're driving in the car, you've got to have the radio on. If you're at home, you've got to have some music on or telly on. You've got to be talking. You can't have time where you're just sitting there not hearing anything. You've got to have something on. It's a way of distracting you from your feelings. And you use that as a method. Some of our methods are insidiously minor. That's what they look like. They think, oh, it's just something I like. But it's actually something you're doing to avoid terror. So in practice, unless you address many of your addictions, it's highly unlikely you'll get to expose the terror that's underneath them. Yeah. So the real course of action for the majority of you is going to need to be a very sincere desire to deconstruct addictions. Very sincere desire. Because the addictions cover over the terror. They suppress it. They help you avoid it. Right? So unless you address those addictions, you'll always finish up reverting to the addiction every time there's even a smidge of terror. You revert to the addiction every time. Now, once you've deconstructed a lot of your addictions, you'll get to the point where your terror is there all the time. It's a very uncomfortable place. Very uncomfortable. Most of you in that place, you will sort of be beside yourself in a way. It's sort of almost like, I've got to do something, what can I do? And then I've taken that away, I no longer do this, I no longer do that, but what can I do? I need to do something. And you drive yourself a bit batty in that place, right? And that's still an indication that there's no desire to feel the terror yet. So you're now touching it, as a, it's like, because your terror feels like that. It's like burny hot, right? Psst. And that's it. And that's as far as you'll go. But unless you get rid of your addictions, unless you deconstruct your addictions, you won't even get to do that. Your addictions are masking the terror. And remember, you've got physical, emotional, and spiritual addictions. So a physical addiction might be food, sweet food, chocolate, those kind of things. Many women, chocolate, necessity in your life, right? So it's an addiction to cover over this. Coffee, another addiction. Like coffee is an interesting addiction because it actually makes you feel like in control while at the same time triggering body responses that actually for a normal person would send them into hyper overdrive. It's really interesting sort of a addiction, coffee. A fear-based addiction. That's why in the Western world it's becoming one of the most popular drinks. It's an allowable fear-based addiction suppressor. So then you go to emotional addictions. These are the kinds of addictions like that you have with men or with women or in situations, or just even emotional addiction where, you've got to, something that seems quite innocent as an emotional transaction with another person. So just needing somebody's reassurance every time that you do something is an emotional addiction that covers over terror. Feeling like you need their approval once you've done it is another emotional addiction that covers over terror. So there's an example of emotional addiction. And then with spiritual addictions, you've got things like a belief system based upon what you believe love to be. So for example, I believe love is a give and take. That's a spiritual addiction. Love's not a give or take, it's just a give. It's actually a gift. It's not a take. If I believe it's a take, or taking is involved, or a barter is involved in love, then I'm engaging love as a spiritual, evol as a spiritual addiction. Evol, remember, the opposite, the reverse of love. So we're engaging the spiritual addiction there. Another spiritual addiction is belief systems, like reincarnation is a spiritual addiction. So it's the addictive viewpoint saying that when you get to the spirit state, that you'll automatically know everything and understand everything. That's what you want to believe. It's not true. You'll know exactly what you know the moment you passed. And one more thing perhaps, and that is that you've passed. And many don't even know that for a few years after they've passed. Right? So the reality is that, many of our spiritual addictions, our belief systems are governed. The whole addiction to believe in somebody sacrificing as a view of love. So if somebody sacrificed for you, isn't it so wonderful? You sacrifice for me. That's a terrible, terrible addiction. Love doesn't sacrifice oneself for another. Right? It doesn't do that. It loves both equally. Right? So that's an addiction. Addiction to believe in those kind of belief systems is spiritual addiction. That spiritual addiction covers over terror of some kind of why do we want to believe that? Well, because I want to believe that if you sacrifice yourself for me, then you love me and you care for me. And why do I want to believe that? Because for a lot of us, it's the only way that we love, by sacrificing ourselves for others. And you take that away from us, and basically we're taking away most of what we think is loving inside of us. So there's going to be a major terrors associated with that. So they're just some examples. I could give more, Kate, but these examples are physical, emotional, spiritual addictions, which when unsatisfied create anger and rage, when satisfied create so-called feeling of comfort and satisfaction. Unless you address those, and even the capping things on top of that, which is the denial altogether, unless you address those particular things, it's highly unlikely you're ever going to even touch the terror, let alone feel it. And you really want to, I know it sounds really strange, but you really want to get to touch it, at least. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I know it sounds strange. It feels almost like the opposite of what, you should do. And this is the thing with a lot of progression on the way that God's designed. It's the opposite of what mankind tells you should have done or should do. So mankind tells you suppress terror at all costs. You do whatever you can. You kill to suppress your terror. You do whatever you can to suppress terror. You do whatever is needed, drugs, alcohol, so physical substances, emotions, and also spiritual addictions. Create whole belief systems that you live your whole life by. You do all of that. That's man's way. God's way is, no, you do the opposite to that. You want to get to touch and then feel the terror that exists within you. So you're progressing when you start touching it, I can feel it there now, type of feeling. And then you're really progressing when your body starts just shaking all the time and you feel like crying all the time or a lot of the time. And then you go through bodily experience where your body may even contort and go where you go cramps. When I started processing through my terror, I went through cramping for sometimes. Well, the first time it happened, it was like 5 or 6 hours long cramp in my whole body. Right, so I was just in agony for 6 hours. Right. Now, it's not going to be that intense for yourself. It might be that intense for the others of the 14, but it won't be for yourself. But yeah, just the intensity of that. And then as I work my way through it, breathe emotionally, crying, whatever I need to do, then eventually I got to the stage where I didn't have it at all. But intense emotional experiences. In the first group, and if you look at that material, you'll see that I described some of those experiences in a question that somebody asked. So it'll look strange. The average person who's with you won't be able to bear it. And that's what I found. I had to deal with it alone. Because the average person with me wanted to put me in hospital, 3 times it happened. Whoever was with me rang up the ambulance and I ended up in hospital because I didn't want to, but they panicked. And as a result, I ended up in hospital quite a number of times before I realised that, no, the best thing to do is to not tell anybody and just go and deal with it, one time I completely passed out, from a lack of oxygen. I couldn't breathe for a long period of time and I just passed out. Now, naturally, when you pass out, you start breathing again anyway, and so it's fine. But the average person probably wouldn't deal with that very well if they were looking at that, you see. And so very intense emotional experiences once you start feeling it. But very short. For the majority of you, it's going to be very short. Remember the diagram I drew? Your current perspective here, remember that, was that here and the terror is really big, right, in terms of proportion of your total emotion. And God's perspective is your terror is just a tiny, tiny little slither, really, right? And that's what I found. Of all the emotions I've ever processed, terror has been my shortest emotion. It took 3.5 months of intense, I started off feeling 4 or 5 hours of cramps in my whole body. And then each time I allowed feeling it more and more and more, I got to the point where, it's 5 minutes and then eventually it's nothing at all. 3.5 months and it was done. And now I've been processing emotion for this will be 21st year this year. So 3.5 months out of 21 years of processing emotion. That gives you an idea of the proportion of emotion that I've had to address with terror. So it's very small in comparison to the total, right? It just is intense, that's all. It's an intense experience, and that's why most people avoid it. Yep. So maybe Anna on this side, and on this side...
AJ, can I just ask a quick question about your terror experience?
Sure.
When you're feeling terror and you're experiencing cramps, where's your head at?
Well, it's experiencing it. So naturally, you don't really think where your head is at. You're going through the pain itself. You're going through the emotional experience. So it's all I could basically do to breathe. Just breathe diaphragmatically. I learnt that I had to learn to breathe diaphragmatically to deal with an emotion, and because there's so much pain anyway, it's pretty hard to think of anything else anyway. So you're in the experience. It's like the main thing is though, when I'm around other people, you get their projection. So that's very, very difficult. So I found it really difficult. The first times I had it, this experience where the first time was when I was, I think it was 19, was the very first fear-based experience I had, which lasted, what happened was I went to the toilet. I was vomiting in the toilet. Went to the toilet, vomited in the toilet, and then I got hold of the door, and my whole body just sort of cramped up, and I couldn't release the door, and I was hanging there by it was a round door handle, and I was hanging there by my body all cramped, and I couldn't get my hand off the door, so I was sort of locked in the door, and I was a bit freaked out. This is my first experience. I was living at home, and I just started sort of hitting my head against the wall till somebody heard me. And then my father and my brother-in-law tried to break into the toilet to get to me. It took them an hour to get into the toilet, right? Because they couldn't turn the handle because I had such a hold on it. They couldn't turn it. And so I was just hanging there until it loosened off a little bit, and then they could get it open. They got me out and they pulled me out, put me in bed and called a doctor, and he just gave me a shot, and that terminated it there and then and there, so it didn't continue. Now at that stage I didn't know what happened, and so I got taken to hospital. They gave me ECGs and EEGs or whatever else, needles in my head to measure my brain waves and whatever else. And that went on for a week or two of tests and everything. Nothing was wrong. And I didn't really understand it. That was my first experience. The second one happened when I was 24. I was married by this stage with 2 children. And I went to Jehovah's Witnesses have a quick build, it's called. And I went to a quick build. I was working on a roof, and I started getting this same feeling that it was coming on. And so what I did is I got down off the roof and I got this guy to take me home. But on the trip, I warned him on the trip home. I just said to him, look, based on the last experience, this ain't going to look very good. But he freaked out and took me to the hospital. Because I started to not breathe, and I was all cramped up and contorted there as well in cramp. And they took me to hospital, again, shot, bang, I was laid out, and so they stopped that entire process. So by the third time, I was starting to learn, I had to go to hospital again. But again, it was because I was with people, and by that stage I learned that, no, the way to deal with this is just to be alone, go through the experience. The first time I was alone and went through the experience, it lasted nearly 6 hours like that, like I said. But I slept for 36 hours afterwards, and I woke up and it was just amazing. My body, for the very first time in my life, felt relaxed. I can't describe it to you, how relaxed it felt. I was so relaxed, I slept for 36 hours, and I woke up and got up and went out. It was daylight, and as I said, I was still with my wife at that stage and 2 children, and I asked them. I said, is it lunchtime? Thinking it was lunchtime on the day that I passed out. But it wasn't. It was 2 days afterwards. So, yeah. And they just said, we didn't know what to do, but, fortunately they didn't do anything and allowed me just to go through the experience. And from that experience, I learnt that that's my fear experience. I've got to go through it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
From that I learned that if I'm...
Could you just hold that mic a bit closer?
From that I learned that if I am feeling fear, but my head is still like...
Working.
It's because I'm not letting myself surrender to it. Hey?
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. When you're in it, it's very overwhelming. You're not going to be able to think of anything else, and highly unlikely that you'll even be conscious or aware of doing anything other than trying to breathe. Does that make sense? Now, remember, what I just described is not as bad as what you have. So don't you go freaking out now and saying... and can you see for myself, if I've done 20 years so far of emotional work, and I'm pretty good at it, right? And can you see that my 3 months experience, while it was very intense, and, you know, even thinking back on it now, you know, doing it alone and so forth without anybody understanding, there's some, you know, just a bit of feeling of a grief there about having to do that. But 20 years of emotion I've addressed, 3 months of it was terror. So you can see proportion. And you got to remember that I've been tortured 3 or 4 times. 4 times. I died by being tortured. I have memories of being stabbed and whatever else. And I've also, in the first century, got violently sexually abused. So, you know, you can see why I'd have a lot of those kind of things. So you can see that the average person on the planet hasn't been tortured, hasn't had all those memories to address. Plus on top of that, you know, having the concept that you're one person only to find out you're another is pretty psychologically stressful, as you can imagine. So you know, all those experiences you won't have to feel. So obviously the amount of terror that's in you in comparison is going to be quite small, right? It's just that you think it's big. You think it's big. And that's the problem, is that our perception of its size infiltrates our willingness to address it. Yeah. So Alan on this. Oh, sorry, Sherry first. Sherry first, so, yep.
So the fear that's under the anger and rage from an addiction not being met,
Yep.
like, is that heading in the direction of...
It's heading in the direction, yes.
It's heading in the right direction.
Yes, but see, many of our addictions only cover a smidge of it. And this is why we use many addictions. And that's why you've also got to remove many addictions before you start really touching the rawness of it.
Yes. So in that place, I remember you talked about going to the supermarket or the shopping centre and just sitting there.
Yep.
Like, I feel like I have so many addictions that basically I should just sit near people and just...
You can do, but again,
feel afraid.
Your willingness to do that will drive your behaviour in that location. So it's no good doing it and being unwilling to feel at the same time.
Yes.
You first need to address your willingness to feel.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Without addressing the willingness to feel, you can put yourself physically in a situation that you think is going to address specific emotions, but it won't. Because unless you're willing to feel, and this is what I learned another thing I learned through my own experience was that I was, initially I went to a body therapist, right? And they helped me sort of get connected to my body, which was really good. But within a few months, what was happening was I was coming up with blockages inside of myself where no amount of work from a therapist would help me get through, right? And that's when I started realising that actually a lot of this has to do with my perception of the emotions and my willingness to address these particular emotions internally. I had to address my unwillingness. Does that make sense?
So these are our false beliefs about what's going to happen if I feel that.
I had a lot of unwillingness, to address emotion. And I had to address each one of these. Firstly, the addictions covered a lot of the unwillingness, so I had to deconstruct the addictions.
Yeah.
And then that exposed the unwillingness, and then you have to feel the unwillingness as an emotion. Right? Because remember, you can't just willpower yourself over these things. You've got to feel them as emotions. Yeah. So even your unwillingness can be felt as emotion. That's why I bought a boxing bag and a baseball bat. Just angry about having to deal with something, angry about having to get into something. Just let yourself feel it, not judge it. Just go into it and let yourself feel it. This helped me connect to my unwillingness. And once I could connect to my unwillingness better, it was really good because I could do that just by being silent long enough, by being quiet long enough, by lying in bed and breathing long enough, I could just get into feeling what the unwillingness is. Once I got through that, then I'd just start crying. And, so I'd be cooking and because my unwillingness gone, start crying, and I just have to sit down on the floor and cry for an hour or so. Then I'd get back up and cook some more.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It was just a natural process after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, sort of two things, if it's okay. So one part of accepting your facade is seeing, like in the situation, you see how much you want all the addictions met. So it's just seeing that, becoming aware of that, and then go with that. Yep. The other part is if you're laying down and you try and feel what's in your body and you can't feel, or you won't feel, or you don't want to, then that's looking at the unwillingness that you don't want to, and go with that.
Correct. Go with the unwillingness.
Yep. And so
most of you judge the unwillingness, because the unwillingness is a part of the facade, right? You judge the unwillingness. You go, oh, I'm being a bad girl now, or whatever. And as a result of judging the unwillingness, you don't actually feel the unwillingness.
Yes.
Which is a lot about anger and not wanting to go there and feeling like somebody else should do it for you, and why do I have to do it? And it's the tantrum, the tantrum. You don't want to have the tantrum, but what I found is having the tantrum can eventually identify why you've got the tantrum, which is a lot about false beliefs. So this is how I finished up getting to some of my false beliefs about emotion, for example, that you could hurt me. See, after I dealt with quite a lot of my tantrums, I felt, I felt that you can't hurt me. I choose to be hurt emotionally. There's nothing you can do that will hurt me, but I can choose to be hurt emotionally. And I don't mean it's a selection of my mind. I mean it's a feeling inside of me that I feel hurt, and I'm choosing to feel that feeling. And if I release that feeling of hurt, then what I found was that after you can do the same thing to me and I'm not hurt anymore. Interesting. So that taught me a lot, right? So there's things that you learn in the process, and this is what's so wonderful, is once you've learnt them through your personal experience, you now can share them. You teach others how to do the same thing. But if you haven't learnt them through your personal experience, no amount of talking is going to help another person through that experience. They have to go through the experience itself.
Thank you.
Yep.
When you felt your terror, when you were feeling other emotions, after you felt your terror, when other emotions came up, did you still go into fear?
Of course, because
when those emotions came up?
Yes, Catherine, fear is underneath your terror. Remember, false beliefs create fear. So every false belief I've had a fear associated with. I've still got some fears to address. I've been addressing them this week. That's why I've had a fever, right? I've had a fever and diarrhea and everything this week, all because of the terror that's coming, the fear that's coming up. But that's a fear associated with specific events.
Yes.
Yeah. It's not the global terror. The global terror is done. Does that make sense? My fears look like your terrors. So the intensity of my emotions when I address fear is probably going to be similar to the intensity of your emotions when you address terror.
Right.
So you'll have a whole heap of bodily symptoms as a result. And as you're building up your bodily symptoms and you're not yet feeling it, your bodily symptoms increase and increase and increase until you release, and then your bodily symptoms will lessen. So this is where I see a lot of you get very, very stressed out physically. You're going, I'm getting worse, I'm getting worse, I'm getting worse, I'm getting worse. And I'm thinking, I'm getting worse, beauty. It means that I'm getting closer, right? So when I get worse and I get closer and closer and closer to an emotion, my body pain increases. So my body pain increases to the point where I start dealing with the emotion. As soon as I start dealing with the emotion, my body pain decreases, and usually decreases more like this, right? But the build up here is occurring because I'm still in my fear, my false beliefs about this particular emotion, because I'm not yet feeling it. So it builds up, and then when I get to this point, where I'm starting to release it. Now the fear has turned into actually, I've gotten over the fear, I've released enough of the fear for me to actually begin experiencing the actual emotion. And once I begin experiencing the actual emotion, usually that, for me, I'm pretty open to the actual emotion, so I feel it pretty rapidly, and as a result, my body symptoms all just go away.
Yes, I was probably just hoping that, if I felt the terror, I wouldn't be feeling this fear when other emotions came up. Yes, were coming up.
Yeah. You're going to go through a cycle. In this area here, it's like a cycle of fear, pain, fear, pain, fear, pain, fear, pain. Every time you feel the fear, there'll be a build-up of body symptoms. So if this is the symptoms of pain inside of your body, physical pain, symptoms is an M, isn't it? Symptoms. Yeah, build up of body symptoms. And that builds up in proportion to the fear that I have. As I release more and more fear, I get to the point where eventually I topple over the edge of feeling the actual emotion. Once I feel the actual emotion, all of your body symptoms will disappear for that particular event, for whatever the false belief was associated with whatever the pain was. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
So
yes.
Tip over. Once it tips over, now I can go on to another, whatever. So I've had symptoms where I've got terrible asthma, chest, terrible for a month, 2 months, a whole year or whatever, and then all of a sudden I topple over the fear and I feel some things intensely for a few weeks, and then all of my stuff's gone.
Thank you.
Yes, and once you get used to it, it's so wonderful. But I'm actually 4 minutes over now, so we've got to stop there for our Q&A. Thanks, guys, for your questions there. Good questions. Thanks, good.